This is Indylive.radio and it's the Yes Group Spotlight series. This week we're listening in to a meeting that was organised by the Aberdeen Independence Movement back in February this year. The meeting is called What Now for the Fishing Industry. It's hosted by Cardin Adam, who at the time was a prospective candidate for the Bamshire and Buchan Coast constituency in Holyrood, and she's since been elected as a member of the Scottish Parliament. Karen is talking to Elaine Whyte of the Clyde Fishing Association. And of course, there are plenty of questions from the members of the Aberdeen Independence Movement. Those of us here at Indylive Radio just want to say we really appreciate the Aberdeen Independence Movement folk for letting us rebroadcast their meeting. So it's just about to start. Here we go.
Okay, we're all good. Can everybody hear me well? Yeah. I can see nodding heads, so that's a good sign. So hello and good evening, and welcome to this AIM event, where we will be discussing what's next for the fishing industry. So I'll be hosting this evening, and I'm Cardin Adam. I'm the SNP candidate for the Bamshire and Buchan Coast at this year's Scottish Parliament elections. I will be joined this evening by our guest, Elaine Whyte, who is a representative of the Clyde Fishermen's Association. So I'll just start off by saying, over the last few months, we have seen the disappointment and legitimate concerns and anger from our fishing industry, and also broader really across our whole fishing communities. So, many are feeling a sense of betrayal and voicing that they feel that the Brexit deal is worse for them than the CFP was. So I'm really grateful actually to Elaine for coming and joining us this evening. And as many people perhaps know, you've heard a lot in the media about the Scottish fishing industry, these last few months, as maybe one whole entity. But there are many areas within that, and also the West Coast, which Elaine represents, and the East Coast here, have within them their own unique areas and their own unique challenges. But we do share some commonality in regards to exports and Brexit deal challenges. And I think it's a good opportunity to gain a basic understanding, firstly, of what our industry looks like, the different working parts of that, and the differences between the Northeast and the West Coast, and also but what commonality brings us together and where we can go from here. So, firstly, before we get going, and if everybody is happy enough to indulge me, I'd like to ask you, Elaine, as a woman myself, in a male-dominated environment, it can come with some challenges. But I'd like to say, as coming into this arena, newly coming into the fishing industry arena, I've been treated really well with respect, regardless of my politics, and nothing against me for being a woman. I haven't faced any negative attitudes, but I'm curious to how women are seen within this sector, and what was the appeal for you? Let us get to know you a little bit.
Okay, it's funny because it's one of the first things that anyone asks us all the time. It's always, well, you're a woman in the fishing industry before anything, before the policy aspects of it. And to be honest with you, it's been like working in any other sector, except potentially I enjoy working very well. They're great characters. They're great men. The one thing I will say is that you have to work a shift. So if you're able to work as hard as they can work, then there's no odds. I've never in any way felt anything but respected for what I do, and I appreciate my colleagues for that. They do a hard job, and I respect them. To the point where there's a lot of preconceptions about fishermen. A lot of them really not true. So for me, it's certainly been a privilege to work with professional, hardworking men that are decent sorts, and that's how I've experienced it. In terms of why I wanted to come into it as well, I've always loved the sea. My family came from the coast, and that's why I was attracted.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you. I wanted to ask, because I think, it's important to try and encourage more women, into this industry as well, and see, always say you can't be what you can't see, and it's always important to make, women visible in certain areas, so people can think, oh, there probably is a part for me to play in that, and to be encouraged to go in there and to know that it is a welcoming environment as well.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
great. Thank you. So for everybody here today, and I know we're going to be having quite a few people here who are very familiar with the fishing industry, but maybe some who aren't so. So just to ask, what are the main parts of the fishing industry? What are the different sectors?
Okay, well, firstly, you pointed out that I'm from Clyde Fishermen's Association, so I'm the West Coast and inshore mainly fishing. But also I'm a member of CIFA, which is a national body. So we have quite a lot of Northeast members and East Coast members in that as well. So we do cover I think we've got about 430 plus boats, and that's all over Scotland. So in terms of the differences in the sectors, you'll hear the main differences being obviously the inshore and the offshore. So the inshore largely being within 6 or 12 nautical miles, depending on your classification that you use, and offshore being outside 12 normally. The different types of fishing that happen mainly are what you'll probably hear is shellfish, pelagic, and whitefish are the main things that we kind of talk about. So shellfish largely happens in the coastal areas. It's what people who maybe are non-quoted tend to go for in coastal areas. So lobster, crab, langoustine, that type of thing that they go for. The whitefish is obviously largely like haddock, cod, those types of things, and that's quite often your demersal boats that are going into the North Sea, etc., larger boats and whatnot. Quite a lot of inshore communities don't really have an awful lot of quota for whitefish, so they tend not to go for it in massive amounts. Some will. Pelagic is your mackerel, your herring, that type of fish, your oily fish. And again, we've got quite a lot of larger boats that go into the North Sea and beyond that are fishing for mackerel. And that's your main distinctions, really.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's maybe worth also talking about gear type actually as well, because in terms of gear type, there's a few different types you can get. You can get the trawl, so you get things like prawn trawl, etc. You get static gear, which is your pots, your creels. You get line fishing, and you also get net fishing, and you get your divers. So there's there's a good selection of different methods of fishing too.
Yeah, I think that's what some people get a bit confused about, or how the media can sometimes portray, the Scottish fishing industry, and it's all lumped into this one entity, and they just assume these boats are just going out having a catch, coming back. But there's so many various, aspects to this, and of course we have the processing sector as well, and the markets too. So I mean, there's quite a lot to learn really if you're just upping your knowledge on this at the moment. So if we are going to compare East and West coasts, what are the main differences between the two?
Okay, I wouldn't compare, the way I see it, a lot of the East Coast inshore communities are very similar to the West Coast inshore communities. So if somebody's got a small trawler or a small creel boat working out of Peterhead, it's not much different to a small boat in the West Coast or a small boat in Dunbar. They're very similar. They've got probably the same markets, etc. Probably the main difference between the Northeast and maybe the West Coast, etc., would be the larger boats, the whitefish boats, and the pelagic boats in the Northeast that have a different type of market. But if you're talking about comparing shellfish boats all around the inshore coast, they're the same no matter where you are, more or less in the whole country.
So we do have some commonality there, of course.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
So going on to Brexit, so this is what people really want to be talking about and getting the bones about as well. In regards to the deal, what did that mean for those individual sectors? How did that affect them, within their own remits and allowances?
Yeah, well, I mean, speaking for our own sector, firstly, we were very concerned from the start. Now, we took a non-political and non-constitutional stance. We just need to roadmap what all of these scenarios mean. And the first thing that we were generally concerned about was our markets, because about 86% of our produce of shellfish goes to the continent. And there's various reasons why the domestic market isn't very advanced, to do with infrastructure, to do with marketing, various reasons. So we were very, very concerned about the fact that we would be losing our markets. And we raised that. We were also concerned about tariffs at the time. So the tariffs we were looking at was maybe about 12.5% if it was WTO. Now, they never happened. But the major concern was, now we're feeling that the major concern is obviously the process. Because in terms of the paperwork that we need to export, it's very extensive. So we're in real trouble with that really at the moment.
Yeah, we've been hearing quite a lot about the different types of paperwork that need to be available. I know that we were hearing at the NES FDP or last Friday how it's been quite difficult. You know, it's a forever moving kind of goalposts in regards to health certificates. For example, you know, they'll get over there with a consignment and then be told, oh, this is the wrong ink, or, you know, and
Yeah.
group has been a problem as well in regards to, you know, some consignments on the, you know, the lorries are fine, and their paperwork's, you know, all well and done, and then one, it just has, you know, it doesn't have what that country needs for it to be exported there.
Yeah, there's been a lot of problems. I mean, I think that the main issue is that we didn't have a 6-month grace period, and the EU will have. So in terms of the system going live from day one, we found out that the system for actually putting, you know, there were certain species were missed off the computer system. Some people were insisting in a certain colour of the ink. It was just really very complicated and remains so. And you're right about the groupage. With the larger catchers, they maybe only put one lorry away, so they have one, you know, the paperwork they can do all of the paperwork. But the difficulty comes when you have a lot of small consignments coming from all over the country, which then becomes a bit of a problem, because you're reliant on someone's paperwork. You know, someone from Tarbert's catches going away with someone from, you know, St Andrews, and it's just one thing that can be wrong that causes a massive delay.
Yeah. I know that something that, you know, I hear quite a lot about, and you know, one of the reasons why there was this sense of betrayal and, you know, real feeling of betrayal within the industry was the red line that was set, and that was, you know, to do with their zonal attachments. Can you explain a little bit to people what that means?
Yeah, of course. Again, we kind of have to go a bit back a little bit because how quota was actually started to be allocated on track record, etc. way back when we joined the EU. Some people had a lot of track record. Some people didn't know they had to get it, so they missed out on the allocation of quota. And ever since, the allocation of quota has been something that some people protect, some people contest about the shares of domestic quota once it comes, you know, how do we share that out? So I think for anybody who was potentially looking for Brexit to say that they wanted to see better fishing opportunities, sometimes it might have been they wanted to see better domestic management, because a lot of those small boats that can't catch any fish, that could have potentially been looked at domestically, but it probably wouldn't have been discussed without Brexit happening, or it might have been a long way off. So they might have just wanted to see themselves getting a little bit of quota so that they could diversify the fishery away from just shellfish. Yeah. Regarding the larger boats, probably they spoke about a sea of opportunity. We hadn't really saw a sea of opportunity, we never did. But that sea of opportunity would be obviously the zonal attachment. So zonal attachment means basically that you have access to the fish in your economic zone. And we have quite a large economic zone. There's a lot of species that stay within that economic zone largely. Some of the species go between different areas, but it was felt that most of our fish, over 60%, was going to the EU, and less than 40% was going to our fishermen, and they wanted to see that rebalanced in some way. When we did join the EU, there would have been about 8 other countries with common grazing rights. It moved to 28 countries. So some people felt, well, now it's we're in a different scenario. We'd like to see a fairer balance. But again, that was probably more the larger boats that felt that way. So in terms of relative stability, that's more about the share that the EU gives to each of the countries, not based on the zonal attachment, and that's why we got 40% where they got 60. So that's why we've got the issue of relative stability and zonal attachment.
So do you see this problem? Is there any unique challenges to us here in Scotland, or are the fishermen across the whole UK facing these similar challenges? Is there anything that's unique to us?
I would say that there's things that are unique to different elements of the sectors. So again, like I said, we may have an inshore boat in the west coast of Scotland that has more in common with a boat down in Cornwall, an inshore boat down in Cornwall, than it would have with maybe a larger pelagic boat or a whitefish boat in the northeast, maybe even. So there are things that are in common. I would say that the men that work the channel and the south coast potentially have an issue with access between French and Dutch boats, etc., because they can come inside and there's a sharing of space there, and that maybe is an issue for them. But it's not been so much of an issue for the west coast. Right. What we do tend to see, but I have had members text me at 3:15 in the morning saying that they're wet and they're freezing cold and they can't land a box of monks because they've got no quota. But there's Spanish boats that can, or French boats that can, or Dutch boats that can. Now, I have some sympathy with that, but a lot of those boats are actually UK registered. So again, I think it was more about looking at the domestic share of quota. If we could have done that, and we can potentially do it now for the future of fisheries management, we might be able to help in that situation. But the deal we've got isn't very encouraging for that at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we're hearing quite a lot about, this is for the next 5 years, stick it out for the next 5 years. But in reality, 5 years is quite a long time. I know it does pass quite quickly for some of us more than others. But the reality is, when this is your livelihood and when this contributes quite a lot, to our coastal communities, in terms of job, work opportunities, particularly, for younger members within the communities as well. What opportunities are going to be there for people, like within the next 5 years? How are we going to get through that? What do you foresee being the biggest issue? And is it going to be a great change?
I think obviously the stocks that people hoped would come back, maybe some of the larger boats had hoped that they would be able to pursue, are not going to be coming back. In fact, they're probably going to have a worse deal in terms of they had more access when they previously fished than what they will have for the next few years anyway. That's clear. So that's an issue. I do think that the UK government have talked about £100 million to reinvest in ports. If that happens, I think we have to be careful where we put the money. We do have to be looking at new opportunities. We do need to be looking at all those ports around the coast that maybe haven't had any support in quite a long time, as well as the larger players too. But 100 million is not a lot when you start to think about. I mean, I certainly know in our area, I've got fishermen who couldn't actually go and catch fish because they wouldn't have access to any ice. There's no ice provision.
Okay.
It's that bad, or they don't have davits to help them lift. Their catch. There's those kind of basics that we just don't have. Yeah. And we really need to we've been kind of, I would say we've been kind of sea blind for an island. We really need to be looking at reinvestment. And for a lot of the people who are coming in, I mean, certainly I know regional areas where a lot of the skippers had daughters who didn't want to go into fishing. And that's actually led to a generation of fishermen lost. Now, traditionally, you wouldn't really go to an employment fair or anything like that. You just, your son or your nephew or whoever was round about the harbour would find their way back on a boat that way. We hadn't been good at professionalising how we get people into the industry, in certain areas anyway. So I think we really have to look at getting new people in. And certainly I like the scheme that Denmark did, which was Become a Fisherman. And they invested a lot of money into TV campaigns, formal training campaigns, etc. And they actually managed to repopulate a lot of depopulating areas. And we need to start thinking, I think, a bit smart about how we do things differently. I'm very fond of the Norwegian model. It's very fair. It has an annual intake of new starts. It looks at how they can support those men with quota as a national asset. Very fond of that, because a lot of young people coming in wouldn't have had the baggage of the issues of the previous system, and we need to look at how we do it better and build it up all around the coast. Yeah,
certainly. I like that idea of some PR around that, because there's great career paths within the fishing industry, and to have that young blood coming in and getting them interested within that, building on it and seeing a bright future in it is really important. I mean, in the northeast with the pelagic boats in the processing sectors, there's hundreds of people that are employed within that, and it's just a massive opportunity. For people to get involved, but it's encouraging people into it. And I think some people have a certain idea of what it would be like. And, maybe a fear as well if they watched a bit too much Trawlerman or whatever. And but it can be an extremely, dangerous job. It is a dangerous job. And I think there needs to be a lot more serious recognition for that. I don't think we see enough of it, really.
No, I think, I completely agree. And I think my job, and there's, like you said, the processing plants, there's a lot of people employed in places like Lanarkshire, nowhere near the sea, to process catch from the northeast, from the west coast, from the east coast. And all of those people feel they're a little bit invisible in the story, and they shouldn't be. Yes. Because there's so many reliant people on it. And I do think, to be a fisherman, my hat goes off to them, because you have to learn how to do your own accounts. You have to learn how to be a businessman. Mm-hmm. You maybe have to do it in a southeasterly gale at sea while you're catching fish as well. The pressure on them is extreme in a lot of cases. And I do think we need to, I go to other countries like Norway and Spain and Italy, various other places. I see how they revere their fishermen in a way. I'm not suggesting that that's what we have to do, but I think we do have to have a respect for it, because I think we have a lot of campaigns again that are very anti-fishing, and a lot of the small communities are facing that, and most often the most sustainable communities. And we really have to turn that perception round about and let fishermen speak to people and give them access to the public.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're an island, this is part of our real culture and our history, and that really does need to be celebrated. And also, how do we fit that into modern times as well? That was great. And something else, we've been, talking about the Brexit deal, and I talk about it quite a lot, but in regards to the funding to help with the challenges of that, a few questions have come up in regards to what we used to get from the EU, and how does that compare to the funding that we are now going to be getting from the UK government?
Well, I think it all depends on what the criteria is going to be. So we previously used to get things like flags, we got EMFF. Sometimes the criteria, it was good, it fitted what the diversification of boats, those types of things, but sometimes I think a lot of the funding probably didn't go towards projects that were very much needed in certain areas. I think I heard of a project at one point that actually was from the Fisheries Fund that was to put up pontoons for leisure boats, and actually stopped the fishermen getting into their port. So there's issues like that have happened. So it's about how we can do that a little bit better. So it's not always about lots of money, but it's about how you tailor that to the regional area. I think is really important. So if your area's got depopulation, how do we look at employment? How do we look at maybe, how do we look at upskilling work? Maybe we need workers to come from a different area. Maybe we don't. Maybe we just need to work with the domestic population. So I think it's about how we use that money. In terms of the amounts, we know that there's 100 million coming in specifically for fishing. There's also a shared prosperity fund, or I think that was what it was called, which may be accessible as well to fishing. I don't know. We don't really know at the moment. So it really depends. But I think the key thing is not always just the amount of money. It's how it's tailored and who it's aimed at, I think is going to be really important.
So I know we've had that double whammy this year as well. We've had the COVID pandemic, and that really did have a huge detrimental effect on the industry. Before the 1st of January this year. And how are we looking in that regards? How are things looking for the fishing industry? What are the main issues there? We're hearing of boats that are still maybe tied up, for example. What are we seeing?
Yeah, it's not good. In many respects, COVID's probably been the biggest hit, because what it did was it fishermen are always planning ahead. So they fish maybe in the summer to save for the winter when the weather's bad, etc. So you might have a feast or a famine depending on what time and the seasonality of fishing is important as well. So what happened was if the fishing boats had any resilience, they used that resilience up for COVID. So when their EU markets closed down, they used that. They were still trying to pay their crews, etc. Then when the domestic markets closed, maybe they were selling to local hotels, etc. That's been really obviously a problem too. So my issue, I think, is that the resilience they now have to deal with the issues with Brexit is much reduced. And then also we might see issues with the negotiations that we're having with other countries. And as I said, we're going to have to negotiate with the EU and with Norway and with all the third countries in terms of access to stocks. And we don't know how, we're not going to have the same flexibility that we had to do that during the year. We used to be able to do that all during the year. It's going to be more limited now. And it depends on those negotiations if we get what our fishermen need. And if they don't get what they need, it will have a knock-on effect all the way around. Yeah. Say, for instance, you might see that a fleet can no longer go to a fish stock, so they might go to a shellfish stock instead, and that might impact the market. So although you might be touching on one fleet, it has a trickle-down effect to the whole market for all of them. So yeah, I mean, right now it's not good. I know some boats that still haven't really been out for months. And obviously I don't see the boats, I see the families behind those boats.
Yeah.
And the hardship that they're going through in terms of paying their mortgage and paying their crew.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard.
Yeah, it's a huge knock-on effect because, you know, we'll hear with employing so many people as well, there's not that you know, not being able to earn that income and be able to spend, you know, locally as well within local businesses. And you know, it's just the knock-on effect, the domino effect ripples throughout everything, as you say. It really
absolutely
does. So
yeah.
Going from that, you know, talking about these are the hardships, the issues and things that we're facing in you know, in the west and east coast, and gone over what the fishing industry looks like. What can we do constructively now? How can we help our fishing industry? What can we, you know, trying to think positively for the future? What are the practical things that we can be doing?
Well, I think as a general public, if there's been a great thing that I saw, although it's not happening to the level we'd like to see it, is obviously direct selling's been happening. People have been going to their fishmongers and they've been ordering fresh fish, the freshest fish you can get, or they've been queuing up next to boats to try and buy something. So I think, of course, do that. That's thank you so much for doing that, everyone who has, because that's the difference between a family getting by and not getting by. So we really appreciate that. I think raise awareness beyond just mainstream media. I think I've seen a lot of preconceptions about what fishermen think, or what all fishermen think, or how they all behave, or what. Get in touch with us. Email, go onto our website, get in touch with us. Always happy to speak to anybody about the conception, because fishermen are like everyone else in society. They have different views. My members have different views, and we don't. It might surprise you how they think. And also from different sector to sector, it varies. So I'd say get in touch with them. I'd say also one of the biggest threats that we probably see as a fishing community is a lot of the kind of organised campaigns that we see against fishing.
Right.
And I don't know why, it's not an issue in Norway, it's not an issue in other countries. We are all for sustainability. I think that's really important to say. We're very well managed. I think we would always hope to do better, but that's where we're at. But there's a lot of misconceptions going about, and I've heard a lot of people saying to me, one type of fishing is good and one type of fishing is bad. That's not the case in our eyes. A mixed fishery, well managed, is the best way to do business, we feel. And I think, ask a few questions. Don't just believe everything on Facebook. If you speak to your fisherman, he will tell you how many legislations he has to comply with, and what they're doing for bycatch, and what kind of gear he uses for selectivity, those types of things. I think that's really important, because right now there's literally millions of pounds a year pouring into Scotland from these campaigns, and it's really, really detrimental to fishermen. So speak to them and find out what they actually do. And I think also maybe just I'd like to see a situation where we do have better facilities on the port, because a busy harbour is actually good for tourism. It's good for all sorts of things. And like you said, the corner shop stays open. Various, there's local businesses thrive from that. So I'd like to see us coming to a point where we actually respect fishing as part of our heritage, and it's something that can be economically vibrant. And I think the Norwegian policy has a light on in every coastal village and town, and that's what I'd like to see. That we're allowing the new people who have never got on a boat yet but might be great fishermen an opportunity to professionalise their industry. But I think, just public support. Come and speak to us. Come. We do a lot of festivals, things like that. I know that there's one up in Peterhead now as well. Get along, speak to the men, because you might learn a lot. I'm sure you would.
I think it was really important what you said there, about not getting education off of Facebook. And I think that goes for everything in life at the moment, doesn't it? It really does have an effect. Everybody has an opinion on everything, but not necessarily understanding what it really involves, what it entails, and everything else behind that. So I think going to those sources that are credible sources is so important to understand that, particularly if you're from a coastal community or a fishing community. Get to understand your area, understand a bit of that history, the culture, and how it works for the fishing industry at this moment in time as well. And as you say, everything that they have to comply with too, and get behind them. And if there is, not everybody's going to agree on everything all the time, but if you do have concerns about anything, you can talk that out, and maybe you've got something of worth to say that people want to hear and listen to. So I think absolutely there needs to be a better communication there, and a better understanding of how it works, really.
Yeah, and I think fishing has been it's been in the public, it's been such a high profile thing, and it's been a case of everybody thinks the same, everybody does the same. And it's not reflective of the reality I see. No. I see fishermen that think all different ways, are in all different sectors, of all different types of businesses, and it's just speak to them, because you will see that and I think it's a shame that maybe some people they're feeling a bit misunderstood. And whether you supported Brexit or you didn't support Brexit, they may have reasons as to why they did whatever they did, whichever way they done it. Certainly the CFP hadn't, in a lot of people's eyes, been successful in every element. Yeah. It might have been in some, might have not been in others, but they'll have reasons why, and speak to them. And like you said, it's through discussion and debate that we can get to a situation that maybe works better for us as a country.
Yeah, I mean, I know myself coming in it from a politics angle. I also hear that they're sick of being used as pawns and used within this political debates, so to speak, and pass back and forth, and they really just need their own genuine voices coming across as to what they actually want, and not what anybody else thinks they can do and put on to them. It's about empowering that community and what they want, and we'll have to understand as well why people voted certain ways and voted for certain things. I know myself, I was maybe perhaps a bit tentative in the beginning, because there is that undercurrent of people say, oh, that's a fishing coastal community there, are you sure you're up for that, the fishermen, etc. And I thought, all right, okay, is there something that I should be worried about here, or something that, quite a fearful attitude? And I have had nothing but, great communications, open communications. Yes, I've had disagreements, but there's been nothing that's been disrespectful at all. And it's really been a great learning curve for me, actually. And they're willing to help me understand what, issues they are facing as well, because ultimately they want people to listen to them. And that's the important thing. And there's nothing to be fearful there at all. Absolutely
no. And I think as well, I spoke to a journalist today, and we were talking about how some fishermen felt about. I know a lot of fishermen who didn't vote at all, because they just don't, because they're maybe not, you said they're not that way. They maybe are quite free thinking people who like to be at sea, or like to, so I think it's quite difficult, for they're practical people, generally clever people, practical people.
Yes.
And I think it's, if they see an issue, they might, we can only address it together by talking to people, and for people to understand why they might have a problem or why they don't have a problem, etc. So just speak to us. I think that's the best thing we can say. we do a lot. We try and do festivals where we work with young kids, we go out to schools. We also have things like Burns Nights where the public can come along and speak to sit at a table with a fisherman and learn a little bit about his job. And it's fascinating. It's fascinating. People are interested, and we love doing that type of work. So.
Absolutely. I was hoping to get out and about a bit more, but of course, COVID's put paid to that a little bit. So no hairnets and no sea legs for me at the moment. But I am really looking forward to it, looking ahead there. But also there can be an absolute, a bright future. There can be a real bright future for the industry, but it takes a lot of different people to come together to be able to make that happen and have those honest and open discussions. I think that's really important. We've had a question in, so I'm going to turn to questions. If we've been blethering for that long, people want to get in with questions. So I don't know who this is from. I don't see a name to it, but it says, has the UK government not confirmed the EU will not end until 2023? EU funding, was that a typo, until 2023? And why all the eggs in one basket with 85% export? What is it with the balance of import-export markets in fishing?
Right, so that's a couple of questions. Yes, there are deadline dates to spend the EU funding for the ones that they still have. I believe there's like a 33 million that the UK government said is still unspent. I think they're working at the moment on what that will be allocated to, but I can't tell you at the moment. I don't know. But obviously that will have to be spent by that time. So we'll hopefully we'll hear soon. Regarding the export markets, as I talked about before, some people haven't traditionally had a lot of quota, and it's very difficult to get access to quota. Quota is expensive, licenses are expensive. They can sometimes be more expensive than the boat. Now, that's not the way it works in some other countries. Some other countries like Norway, they keep it as a national asset. You must have a boat to get quota. You're allocated it annually. And they also have a separate allocation of quota so that they can give that to new starts every year. It's not like that here. With our quota, a lot of it, you do get some non-sector quota, which some people can use. But there are some community quotas as well in places like Shetland, and I believe Orkney and the Western Isles had a certain amount too. But in most places, it's very difficult to get finfish, etc. So the markets were traditionally built around the EU for a number of reasons, because actually they had more of a taste for shellfish. And that was what our guys could catch. So they got the best price, and that was, but I do think that was 40 years ago. And I do think the EU markets will always be important to us. And I think that's really, it's important to say. We want to protect them as much as we can. But I think we're now in a space as well where people in Scotland and, other markets maybe are appreciating the quality of our shellfish, and that we can try and do more domestically as well as maybe internationally to market that. Some of the issues I do see with that is some of the communities are quite rural. So we need to think about how we change our domestic and our international supply chains. We need to get better connections, transport, etc. And as I said, their processing facilities can be pretty poor in a lot of their areas in Scotland. So we're gonna, if we want to try and even do more domestically or internationally, we need to get processing facilities all around the coast that are fit for purpose.
Yeah. Thank you, Elaine. It's really, really interesting. I have another question here, and I'm going to open this up to questions now. If anybody wants to come in, you can either put it in the chat, or you can, is there a stick up your hand function, or just put on your video and wave your hand. But you can voice it as well. You don't have to put it in the chat, or if you want to hide, you can. So Neil Cameron asks, would a dedicated Scottish Government Minister for Fisheries be beneficial to the Scottish fishing industry? Well, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, I think Fergus Ewing has been a very good fisheries minister. That's my view, and I do think though sometimes you can that it's very important. It's a very complex area, and I do think we need as much resource on that as possible. I think sometimes there can be contentions between aquaculture and fisheries, and wild fisheries, particularly in the West Coast, not so much in the East Coast. So there may sometimes be issues there. When ministers have a couple of briefs, but I would say by and large we have a very good fisheries minister. And I think that's a view shared across the sector mainly. So
yeah, that's what I hear. That's what I do hear quite a lot of. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask, or comments even, if you have something to say? Can't see anybody. Yeah, Andrew, is it? Yeah.
Hi, Elaine. I work for the Scottish Salmon Producers Organisation, so we've been working with yourselves and with the likes of Jimmy Buchan as well, and Donna Fordyce to try and get export moving to market. And one of the things that Jimmy Buchan has been talking a lot about is the over centralisation at TFDS Larkhall and the need for something similar to that on the East Coast. Now, I used to work in Shetland for one of the salmon producers up there before moving to SSPO. And if you consider that you've got to get product, whether that's from fishery or from aquaculture, overnight on a ferry, potentially gets cancelled from the weather to Aberdeen, and then it has to go to Larkhall to be processed. And the freshness of aquaculture produce and fisheries produce is so important. Do you think there is a need for investment in the Northeast, whether that's Dundee or Aberdeen, for another facility to expedite this process? Because it's something I've seen a lot of talk about, and I think there might be a need for it. So I'm interested in your perspective.
I think there's a need for a rethink all round, actually, because just as you're talking about, actually, it's easier to get from Peterhead to Larkhall than it would be from Campbelltown to Larkhall. On the roads, it's probably about 3 hours driving from Campbelltown. So I completely agree. And at the moment, even with our processing facilities, like for scampi, if our guys are fishing for tails, it has to go to Northern Ireland at the moment and then has to come back again. And there's going to be issues with that once the grace period finishes. So I think it's a case of looking regionally at where all of our areas are and trying to build capacity. So if it's needed in the Northeast, it might free up a little bit more for the Central Belt. But like I said, our guys are probably just as far away in a lot of respects too. So I do think there's a need to look at that and process and facilities across the board. Like I said, some of our guys don't even have ice to land to for produce. And we can't diversify our fisheries if we don't have anything harbour side. And what we find is a lot of times people, you know, we've got a colleague in St Andrews who managed to raise funds for a fisheries hut, and they've traditionally been a fisheries hut there, and it was just to save safety equipment. He got the funding through FLAG, which is the EMFF type schedule, and then they didn't get planning permission because they were frightened that it might ruin the aesthetics of the harbour, although there had always been one there. And I think we need to raise that awareness that actually we need a space for fishermen. As much as everyone wants a nice executive flat next to the harbour, but we need to be thinking about the facilities that will make it work as well and not exclude them. So if they need a processing plant or they need an export hub or whatever they need, we need to be looking at that closely across the board.
So infrastructure is certainly something that would be top of a wish list, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. And it's not always massive. It's not, it could be a very small investment could make a huge difference to how we do things.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a question through. Is this question from Facebook? Do boats landing in Denmark show that being a coastal state in the EU was actually a good thing? That's a question from Facebook.
The boats had always landed in Denmark. And I believe a few years ago there was some work to look at socioeconomic link of making sure that more of a percentage of the catch could be landed in Scotland, so that the ongoing profitability attached to that would be linked more to Scotland. I think it's something that they might look at again. I don't know. Do I think it means it's better being in the EU? I think it means we have major issues at the moment, and some boats are able to do that. And so it's it makes more economic sense for them to do it. But you must remember that a lot of 10-metre boats and 12-metre boats coming out of the same port are not going to be able to do that. And we certainly have some boats who are landing to Ireland as well, which is closer to them. So I think we need to be very aware of the regional disadvantages that we may have at the moment, and we need to be thinking about how we address them for sure. But it did happen before. It's not a new thing. It's just a thing that might be happening more often now.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, coming from the northeast, we want landings here.
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
we want to be able to keep our you know, processing sectors open, running, and buzzing and full. So anything that, you know, brings as much of that landings into the northeast is better for us. Okay, here's another question came through. And this is from Mary. I'll call her My Mary. Is there anything can be done about fishers selling their quotas to other countries? Significant parts of the British quota have been sold off to foreign-owned boats which sail under a British flag.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's, if I'm being honest, that's probably more of an issue for down south. Okay. Quite a bit, but of course, if they can fish in Scottish waters as well. But it's more of, you see more of the flagship boats down south having went that way. In Scotland, it's different. We have more of a few companies that are Scottish owned, that kind of have most of the quota, I guess. You'll have seen a lot of coverage of that. I certainly think we need to reevaluate what we do with any new quota coming in, and the Scottish Government have said that they will be doing that with any new quota coming in, new shares. I think longer term, for the new people coming in, we might need to look at something fair for them. But I appreciate that businesses have been built up on the quota that they have at the moment as well, and business stability is important. So it's how you find a balance of being fair to new people coming in as well. But yeah, I'm sure that that's something that the government are considering, I guess, at the moment.
Okay. Audrey.
Hi, Karen. Thanks very much. And thanks, Elaine. I've learned a lot. It's been really interesting to listen to you. I've just got a kind of comment to make. It's a little bit going off a slight tangent, but one of the things I'm particularly interested in is around food insecurity, food poverty, and the work that's going on around trying to make healthy, nutritious food available to everyone, because we know at the moment that's not happening. We've got this amazing rise in food bank use right across the social spectrum. And so I suppose what I'm thinking about, just as we're having this discussion, is whether or not maybe down the line there are some opportunities to really think about how, you know, especially in the context of sort of diversifying and looking at new opportunities, particularly around that sort of end point and the processing sector, if there's a way that we can maybe capture or make a stronger link between fish, this amazing Scottish fish produce, but looking at it from the perspective of the agenda around healthy eating, healthy lifestyles, health and well-being, which are all sort of interlinked. So I'm just kind of throwing that into the mix a little bit.
Well, yes, 100%. And that's why we do the festivals every year. And there's nothing better than seeing the children eating, you know, langoustines and learning how they cook it. Sometimes they've never seen them before. You have a really great asset in the Northeast. You've got Kat and John Franchitti, who work with Seafood Scotland. They go around and they teach a lot of people how to cook, you know, whether it's a pot noodle and you're just putting a little bit of fish in it, or if you want to make a Cullen skink. They do some excellent work there, and it's something that's very close to my heart. We do a lot of work with food banks in the community, etc., and catching to give to local community. We're just about to start another scheme that way. So, and also there could be things like working with schools, school dinners, those kind of things, which are both boosting the domestic market. But I think we need to get supermarkets on board with this, or domestic supermarkets. Quite a lot of them go with accreditation schemes. So you sometimes find that they go for sustainability, but sometimes the sustainability label isn't very much connected to the socioeconomics of the local area, and the footprint of maybe just getting from local boats. And we really need to work on that branding and certification in local supermarkets as well, and get our produce there. But 100%, if there's anything that we can do to start improving that kind of knowledge of healthy eating, helping people to do it, we're all for that, very much for it.
Great, that's a great topic actually, Audrey. Thanks for bringing that in there. We have a comment from Michael Park who says, a great insight from Elaine regarding the fishing industry and our plights. So somebody happy to hear what you're saying. Mary says, it's nae langoustine, they're prawns. Well, Mary, you know why they're called langoustine, because they're the langoustines. Oh, is everybody groaning? They're guy big prawns.
Called them so many different things.
Stephen Calder, are there different issues for the export of fresh fish from the northeast to the EU for processed fish and for live shellfish? Can this be resolved under the Brexit deal with the end of frictionless borders? Are delays because of health inspection certificates an issue that can be overcome? It's quite a few questions in there. Stephen.
I was going to say it's quite a few questions. It depends. I mean, the major issue is if it's fresh fish, if it's fresh or live, if it's shellfish, it has to get there within a very quick period of time. So that's kind of we were going from 1 day basically to get to the continent to 4 days, which basically means you're spoiling your goods or you're losing your goods. So that's terrifying. And of course, it is to do with the process. But as I said, it's so details. We're currently in meetings every single day about this, about the colours of ink that the paperwork involves, and it's so meticulous that it's a very long debate to get into. But of course, the debate on streamlining the process is something that we really have to look at doing. In this day and age, it's very unusual to have everything in paper. Actually, I mean, we should be maybe trying to streamline as much as we can electronically. It should be possible. In terms of fresh fin fish, if we're talking about, it depends. I mean, they will face the same issues that we face in going to the continent and getting there in a timely fashion. But I guess if they're frozen fish, it's a different issue. It's not as critical. But we're all having problems. It's across the board at the moment in terms of getting to the EU.
Yes. Christian Allard. Hello, Christian. Are any fishers better off this year than last, or should we find out way back into the EU or should we find our way back into the EU single market?
I would say that this year we're not going to. Well, I would imagine maybe the pelagic sector had finished fishing before a lot of this kicked off, and it also depends on where your market has been. So, for instance, if you're in the pelagic sector, maybe you're selling to Russia or somewhere like that. Maybe you won't be as impacted if you have a more diverse market. Some people are concentrating more in the Far East, but there's not that many actually. We could do a lot more there. So I wouldn't say anybody's going to be any better off this year, or there'll be very few people. I would think everybody's been severely impacted that I know, certainly in fishing. I don't think you can see, I have to be optimistic, but I think for the next couple of years it's going to be tricky, even with the annual negotiations, etc. We're not going to see a massive benefit. We certainly aren't. In terms of should we find our way back into the single market, I think these are questions for the public and for politicians to answer. I think what we'll do as a fishing association is scenario plan for every eventuality, and try and find the problems and the positives in every sector. So that's going to be a wider debate, I guess, for everyone to take on board.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, this is from Andrew Fry. I don't know if it's necessarily no, there is a question at the end. So the new normal is not sustainable for businesses. In aquaculture alone, salmon farmers and mussel farmers have delayed harvest as long as possible, but eventually they will have to come out of the sea and off to market. I imagine it might be similar for fisheries too. If the system is barely working now, how can we expect it to work at full production capacity?
Yeah, that's true. It's a massive concern. I think the way I feel at the moment is, I've always looked at it as, if things are pretty bad, if things aren't working, it means on the flip side, there's a lot of potential to do better. So when I look at an empty harbour and I see there's not many young people going to the job, or I see that if we do a bit of planning, we can potentially make it a better situation. I certainly think we have to be looking at things like online marketing. We have to be doing things like the auctions they do in Norway, which are fantastic, because what they do is they kind of a skipper can upload what his catch is, and before he gets to the harbour, he can have a wholesaler waiting on his catch, but he could also have somebody who's just popped down for their tea and they just want a couple of bits of cod or whatever there too. And this is all from an online app. So I think we've been slow to do these things, and I think that's going to be the future, and I think that will help the domestic market too, because right now I've heard so many people getting in touch with me saying, I don't know how to get shellfish, how do I? So I think that's the way, making it accessible to people, and we're going to just have to move the times, but we're going to have to do it quickly, I think. Yeah, for sure. But in terms of this normal is not sustainable, I would have to agree, but we're going to have to find new ways, hopefully through technology and through new investment and new planning, to try and make our markets more stable domestically and internationally.
Yeah, I mean, I do know, you know, the fish vans and the fish mannies that come around certain areas are always, you know, it's a bit of a joy for some communities and some neighbourhoods as well. You know, I've been hearing great stories about how, you know, it was a highlight of some pensioners' weeks for for when they had the fish van come around and they'd be able to get a blether and a chat there, particularly during the time of COVID. You know, they'd all be out social distancing and queuing up to get their fish. But I think as well, you know, in terms of how, you know, we have changed this year quite a lot more online. Certainly a lot more home deliveries. I've gone more home deliveries for my shop and etc. Just from a safety standpoint, really, that it would quite be you know, it would be quite handy if I could have, you know, an app where I could just order that fresh fish on there and have that delivery. And I know that, you know, a few local businesses have started doing that and offering that service during COVID as well. So I think probably during this time of huge transitions with Brexit and with COVID, it always gets you thinking out of that, you know, the narrative that you've always kind of been in. So it will be quite exciting to see how that's taken forward and used. Ross, was the fishing industry sacrificed by the UK government in order to push through their Brexit? That's quite a blunt, straightforward question. I don't know if you want to answer that one, Elaine.
Yeah, well, I'm not in the UK government, so I can't answer that. I don't know what was going on with those trade deals. But what I would say going forward is what I've seen over the last few weeks, which is very positive, is that we have more practical people around the table now with both governments. We have a task force where Fergus Ewing is there, as well as the UK government now, and they're trying to work together to get over those issues. I would have liked to see that happen in a more joined up way before, but what you find is quite a lot of the practical people aren't always around the table at the right times, and they could have pointed out the issues or the traps, like somebody mentioned depuration. You know, somebody could, I'm sure somebody involved in that field would have known that would have been an issue. So it's just getting the right people around the table to make sure that I think sometimes we lack that practical knowledge. Do I think it's been sold out? Well, I don't think anybody's happy with the deal. In terms of, I think it's a lot to do with the practicalities as well. I think we would have rather had a grace period at least, to allow us, you know, to be able to get they're not niggles. I think I've said this before, to work our way through the issues the same way that France will be able to. We've now asked for that with the Northern Ireland, but I do think I wouldn't be surprised if the EU come back and ask us for a longer period to work through when it's their turn to do so, because we need better planning, and we need people to listen to the people at the job. That's what we need. And then I think there would be less issues with sellouts or lack of understanding if people understood the job at a practical level.
What I would say to Ross, you know, I'll come in this angle from a politician's point of view. I think, you know, absolutely there maybe wasn't the right people there given the the right knowledge that was needed, and a lot of things were left out. A lot of things were left out, and maybe, you know, my feeling is a lot of things were pushed to the side to get this through rapidly. And, you know, it's not just our fishing industry. I think it has been devastating for that. I think there was promises made that weren't kept, which is very apparent. And the communication that I've had with skippers and people within that industry are extremely irate, and they really do feel let down. And we also have, we're seeing in the news as well, we're talking about fishing today, but also, the music and arts industry, the fashion industry, even we heard yesterday, are all having lots of problems with this. So
I think the best analogy I ever heard is when you're leaving a club, it's as if we built a village in Lego, and we had the blue bricks and Spain had the red bricks, and France had the green ones, and us saying, right, we're going to take back our blue bricks is fine in principle, but it's how many things that's attached to, and there was probably a lot of unknown consequences, and everyone may be trying their very best, but you can't just demolish without there being implications, and I think that's the issue.
That is a really good analogy, actually. Yeah, I like that. I've got a very visual mind, so I like my analogies. Yes, Ross, I agree. There was promises made that they knew they couldn't keep. So yeah, I think that's political opinion as well. So again, coming from my point of view, I'm agreeing with you there. But I think this has been a really constructive chat. Has anybody else got any questions? I think the questions have died down a little bit, but I really want to thank you for coming, Elaine, because I think, in my mind at this moment in time, there's always going to be a lot of pointing fingers, and of course that's the nature of the job that I'm in and that I'm going in as well. But what I really want to do is have this positive, constructive look at how we can really, deal with the situation that we are in right now at this moment in time, and where we can move forward from it. Because I think if we're just constantly spinning on our heels and not really getting anywhere, I don't think it's helpful for anyone. And, as you say, people have different views on different things, and, voted for all kinds of different things, and a different makeup of that. We do have, within the fishing industry, people that perhaps voted to stay a part of the UK and voted for Brexit. But we also have those that wanted to stay in the UK and the EU, and we had people who wanted, independence, but out the EU. There's such a broad
everything in between. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Some people who just didn't vote. I mean, this is the thing. They didn't go into politics. They're fishermen. Mm-hmm. So and certainly that's what I see every day. I don't see a blanket, and for me, it's always like asking how. Like I think I said earlier on, how does someone with brown hair vote? I don't know. They vote all different. They vote all different ways for different reasons, and I think that's good. If one thing is coming out of that, at least that there's a narrative now that's coming out, which is, I think, more reflective. That some people had concerns, that some people want to work through these, and I think you're right. The blaming at this stage won't help us. The practical planning is going to help us, because at the end of the day, we want to see a nation that's making the most of its asset, and it's a national asset.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the thing. It is a national asset, and part of, what I said before, being our history and our culture as well. And we really need to be nurturing that and doing what we can to make sure that going forward, that we can do as much as we can to support it. I think that's, vitally important. So we've had a message saying excellent discussion. So that's great. I hope everybody had a great time listening in. And thank you everybody for coming along on a Thursday evening to join in with our fishing chat. And thank you so much, Elaine.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
You're listening to Indylive.radio, and that was the latest in our Yes Group Spotlight series. It was called What Now for the Fishing Industry, with the Aberdeen Independence Movement, conversation between Elaine Whyte of the Clyde Fishing Association and Cardin Adam, MSP. If you want to find out more about AIM, the Aberdeen Independence Movement, you'll find them on Twitter and also on Facebook. If you live up that way, I'm sure they'd be very pleased to have you join in their meetings. And once again, here at Indylive Radio, thank you very much to the Aberdeen Independence Movement for letting us rebroadcast your meeting.